Hello, this video is going to be my takeaways from a recent trip to Berlin and just generally some thoughts and perspectives on life that I've been having recently. I'm 23, I live in London, and my name's Lucy. I hope you stick around. Hello, thank you so much for clicking on this video. This is a little bit of a new style for me, and I've just come to a park near where I live. I'm going to try and record a little video like this using this little mic. If you haven't come across my channel before, hi, my name's Lucy. I live in London and I'm 23, working full time and kind of doing this YouTube thing as a bit of a creative side project and hobby, really. I feel like when you get to adulthood, hobbies become really scarce. So this is something that I'm trying to devote as much time as I can to. And I love it. I feel like it adds just a different kind of purpose in my life. And thank you so much for clicking on and sticking around if you do decide to. I'd love that. So to set the scene, I've literally just got back from a weekend in Berlin. So this is a Tuesday afternoon when I'm recording this, and normally I should be in the office. However, I'm on annual leave because we were in Berlin. So this is kind of me making the most of the little bit of time that I have this afternoon to come out here and film a YouTube video, because this has been something that I've wanted to do for a while. And I also just have so much on my mind after visiting Berlin. I feel like it's such a fascinating city. It's really, really rich in history, and there's also such like a broad range of history that has occurred in the last like 100 years. And just a bit of a trigger warning, I'm not going to obviously touch like on any details to do with, you know, that era of history. You all know what I mean. But I will be kind of talking about that era of history. So if there's any kind of uncomfortableness or it's too much, potentially if you have Jewish heritage, etc., then, you know, maybe just a trigger warning ahead of that. But generally I'm just going to be speaking about my perspectives and things that I learn and kind of takeaways for how I want to live my life and like how I see the current state of affairs in the world. It's also a little bit of a time capsule for me just to see what my takeaways were from this trip. So as a little side note, I once recorded a podcast episode. If you don't know, I used to run a podcast called Lucy Talks, and I did that kind of throughout uni, and I once recorded a episode outside in my parents' like garden at home, and this is kind of like feeling like that but an evolved version. So I'm enjoying the podcast style feel to having a microphone in front of me, and also just to be sat outside. It's really lovely. I am loving this park near where I live, and yeah, I know that it's going to become, I've only like recently moved to the area, but I know it's going to become such like a meaningful place. I've recently been reading this book here called Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman, and really just have had so many fascinating like trains of thoughts from this book. I think his ideas are amazing. But yeah, let's get into some of my takeaways from Berlin and also from this book, and just generally like what's been on my mind. So my first takeaway is that humans are capable of some truly horrific things, and more so that any of us in the right set of circumstances, or rather the wrong set of circumstances, can be extremely susceptible to, you know, cult mentalities and political ideals that seem to align with what we want because of economic benefits or other benefits to do with unemployment, etc., and kind of getting swept along in certain ideals, certain political beliefs that are really just horrific. I'm talking about, you know, Hitler's regime and the Nazi Party. But I think what I'm taking away here is that in the wrong circumstances, kind of any of us are capable of falling into those belief systems. It was kind of a whole population, and that's what really struck me walking around, is like the vast kind of seas of people that you see in these photos. It's not just one or two individuals, like it's an entire population, and it's this kind of community-based ideal that they tried to promote, and people getting swept along with that. And I just think, yeah, it was absolutely horrific. I think it's really easy to have this like us and them mentality, and to think that we're somehow different from people who've maybe like made mistakes or done wrongdoings. And that's not in any way to excuse the beliefs that they had, and not to excuse their behaviour, and to excuse, you know, not standing up for that. But the takeaway that I kind of have is that it's not that they're these subset of horrible people to begin with. They got swept along with other people's ideas and the propaganda that was so strong and like literally all around them. And I think it just speaks to how susceptible we all are and how important it is to have a strong sense of what your own values are, and how it's so important to have your own ability to think critically about what we're consuming, especially online and in, you know, mainstream media as well. You have to have this critical thinking and like a critical mind, because otherwise you can get swept away with different things. And it's not to say you have to question literally everything. I think we also go too far the other way in terms of then, you know, conspiracies arise and all of that side of things, and that's another whole set of problems and like another kind of cult mentality, I guess, in a way. I don't know, I might be using that term not quite right there, but my takeaway is that it's important to be discerning about the information you're receiving and to think critically about the systems that we exist in, because we're not just individuals thinking independently. We're part of these bigger systems. We're part of the, you know, economic pools that are operating without us really knowing. And I just think it's misguided almost. And I've definitely had this belief in the past, to think that you're entirely in control of the thoughts that you have and the beliefs that you have and all of that. Like, so much of it is shaped by the communities around us and the culture that we exist in, for good and for bad, and it's just important to keep that in mind. So I hope I've said that in the right way. In no way, shape or form am I trying to discount the fact that the people that followed that regime like allowed for some absolutely atrocious things to happen. I think it's just worth remembering that we are all kind of susceptible to that, and that's my main takeaway there. The second thing I want to talk about, which is kind of linked to the first thing, is the idea that the systems that we exist in are really hard to see outside of, and it's really hard to kind of have your own individual perspective outside of that. I know it does link on to before, but I'm going to read a little bit from this book, Utopia for Realists. So his kind of principle here is that the crisis of our time is that we can't come up with anything better than the system we already live in, and that we're kind of all on autopilot collectively, just going along with the inertia of the system that we live in. And he kind of like quite rightly acknowledges that we have it really good. Like, we have a world which has advanced so much in the last 100 years. Things like crime rates have gone down very significantly. You know, healthcare has greatly improved. The amount of people uptaking in vaccine programs has greatly improved. Disease has gone down. You know, we live in a very very friendly world in some ways, but in a lot of ways not so. And he's kind of like raising the point, and the premise of this book is that we have almost forgotten the art of imagining alternative futures. And because we have got it good, you know, comparative to previous generations, we do have it really good. I'm literally sat here on a Tuesday afternoon recording into a little microphone that's the size of my palm, and a camera that's absolutely tiny. Like, clearly technology and all of that is fantastic, but also this skill of imagining like a different future and imagining different possibilities for what can come is sort of a bit lost. And I just find that really encouraging, because it shows that this world that we exist in right now is not fixed, and nothing's fixed. We can choose to, you know, imagine different alternatives, and we can put plans in place to change that to some extent. So I'm going to read a little bit out to you. He says that true progress begins with something no knowledge economy can produce: wisdom about what it means to live well. We have to do what great thinkers like John Stuart Mill, Bertrand Russell and John Maynard Keynes were already advocating 100 years ago: to value ends above means and prefer the good to the useful. We have to direct our minds to the future, to stop consuming our own discontent through polls and the relentlessly bad news media, to consider alternatives and form new collectives, to transcend this confining zeitgeist and recognise our shared idealism. Maybe then we'll also be able to look out beyond ourselves and out at the world. There we'll see that good old progress is still marching along its merry way. We see that we live in a marvellous age, a time of diminishing hunger and war and surging prosperity and life expectancies. But we'll also see just how much there is left for us, the richest 10%, 5% or 1% to do. And he also just briefly mentions that there are different kinds of utopia. There are utopias such as fascism, those forms of utopia that are very rigid and kind of have like a blueprint model of how a certain society should be, based on like largely a couple of people or like one person's ideas. And here he's talking about many different alternative horizons that might spark people's imagination. And he says here that conflicting utopias are the lifeblood of democracy after all, which I read this, a couple of weeks ago, and given my recent trip to Berlin, I think is incredibly important to stress. So just throwing that in there. But yeah, my point here, my second takeaway is just that we've kind of lost the art of imagination, and we've lost the art to see outside the systems that we exist in. And I think that's a really valuable thing to cultivate, especially in our young people. And yeah, I don't know. I love imagination. I think it's such like a lost art in adults, and I kind of want to express that in my videos and just express alternative horizons, as he says it, because we don't have to be stuck in these systems that are like hurtling towards climate destruction and mass extinctions. There are other ways, and by being rigid in our thinking, we close ourselves off to alternative futures. My third point is sort of an extension of this, and specifically I want to talk about how trans rights and gay rights are human rights. And I distinguish the two here because I recently watched an amazing TED Talk. I can't remember who it was by. I'll put it on the screen. I thought it was really, really simple, and I appreciated the simplicity in his arguments. And the video was about how trans rights are human rights. And again, having recently been, learning and absorbing the horrors of concentration camps and the pointless murder of millions of people, Jews, the Romani people, the Soviets, countless people from across Europe, particularly Jews, but also gay people and particularly gay men. And the part that I found really just sad, I guess, is that the fact that even though the Allies kind of condemned the, mindless killing of millions of Jews, they didn't really seem to care that much that the Nazis had killed a load of gay people. Like it wasn't aligned with their belief system that was a particularly horrific thing. And I guess even if you look at the treatment of Alan Turing, who cracked the Enigma code and was a gay man, he was then subjected to conversion therapy after he basically pretty much handed, he was instrumental in the Allies winning the war. And I just think it's such a sad part of the story that even though millions of people were killed, it wasn't seen as a huge problem that they were persecuted. And in that way, I think it's really important to raise the fact that trans people across the world are being, subjected to bullying ultimately, and are discriminated against for who they are and for being a member of that community. And ultimately, it's just a very sad parallel, because currently in the world, trans people are really being marginalised and discriminated against and bullied ultimately by very powerful people. And I can't help but see connections between how particularly gay men were treated during the Holocaust. As far as I know, there's no concentration camps that trans people are being sent to, but I think you can see how their treatment in the media, the legislation being passed against them, particularly in the US. I mean, the trans community is a vulnerable community at the moment, and the point that the pastor in this TED Talk made is that we shouldn't allow powerful people to bully vulnerable people. Full stop. I'm bi. I have never really had much of a problem, to be honest, because largely in the UK, gay rights are very open, and I mean that in terms of the LGB rather than the LGBT, because I know that there's still a difference. And yeah, it just makes me realise how lucky I am to be able to be openly bi and to be able to say I have a girlfriend very comfortably, and for that not to be a marker on my character or for something that I'm discriminated against. I'm very, very lucky to be living in the age that I'm living in that regards, like completely. But I think it's just interesting because, you know, like gay marriage was only introduced in the UK in 2013. I could have quite easily had a different life if I was like 10 years previous. In terms of, I probably wouldn't have come out. Like, I don't know, it might, maybe not, who knows. But I think my main message here is, again, that it's important to think critically about the systems that we exist in, and to question our beliefs, and to question where they've come from, to question if we agree with our thoughts, and just to kind of get a perspective on what we think is important and who is currently being exploited by the systems that we live in, or rather discriminated against by those systems. I hope that generally people become more accepting of the trans community and trans rights and trans healthcare, and that we can like find solutions. Again, it's this like rigid thinking and a lack of imagination leading to people being scared of the unknown. For myself, I'm trying to actively be more discerning with my thoughts and just to hold space for alternative possibilities and alternative ideas, because that's important. I don't want to be fixed in everything that I think and believe in. I'm sure I have so many more takeaways. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the Berlin Wall and, you know, the division that caused, and the kind of parallels I see with Trump's policies of building the walls between the USA and Mexico, and like, I don't know, just all the division and hate that government or like the Trump administration is causing. I don't know, there's so many things I could say, but all in all, I loved Berlin. I kind of want to touch on slightly more uplifting note. I could go on forever, but I'll hold that for another day. I loved Berlin. I think it was a really fascinating city, and it's kind of unlike any of the other cities I've visited in recent years, in that it's clearly like such recent history. I think you can really tell in the architecture and the kind of process of rebuilding, and that takes a long time, and it still isn't kind of complete in the same way that I walk around London and it feels complete. It doesn't feel like the city is it's obviously growing and developing, but it doesn't feel like it's been war-torn in a while, luckily. But with Berlin, you can kind of like see the remnants of war, and especially the Berlin Wall, as that's more recent. We did a really, really great walking tour with a guy called Rodolfo, and I'm going to leave his tour in the description because that was like one of the main highlights of our trip. We both agreed that, it's just like the best way to see a city and to experience the history, and to be able to like connect the dots between places. And you just walk around and there's just so much that's happened in this one place, which is just crazy. You can also watch the vlog of our trip. I'll leave that up in the eye, whichever corner that is as well. Leave this video a like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts below. More importantly, please let me know in the comments which like takeaways resonated with you. I'd really love to continue this conversation and just to hear other perspectives on the thoughts that I had, and maybe you've been to Berlin and you took away completely different things. Like that's amazing. But yeah, thank you so much, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Really enjoying YouTube recently, and I hope that you can stick around for future videos. Lots of love. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.